coming tonight. I know there's not many of us here. Typically, we would have everyone come down and shut the mic off just to make it a little bit more personalized, but this is being recorded by BCAT, so you can all stay where you are. That's why we're going to use the mic tonight. So, this is my name's Joe Adebato. I'm the Director of Counseling. Myself and Miss Emily Minty and Mrs. Molly Leary will be presenting a variety of topics that relate to the college search and selection process. This is actually our first live event that we've had for our department, the counseling department, since probably pre-COVID. So welcome back. Again, what we've done over the years with this presentation is we try to cover the important pieces of the college search and selection process. Keep in mind the information you're hearing tonight, and I see students here, which is great, but this information has been shared with students. We started last January or February in second semester, and we've had discussions throughout the spring, and we are presently having discussions with seniors now in the fall. So you're getting a lot of information at once, so just please recognize that. That's not how we roll it out with students. I think it's good for students to be here, just to hear all the information. Maybe you had missed something in your meeting with your counselor, so it can be helpful in that respect. And one other thing I wanted to point out for seniors, I think seniors are aware of this, but for parents of seniors, we have, all seniors have a dedicated study period, first semester, which essentially is a free period that they have. And the idea behind that extra time first semester is to meet with their school counselor, to plan for college, or whatever the post-secondary plan is. We offer these post-secondary planning nights just because about 90 to 95% of our seniors do go off to either 2 or 4 year colleges. And then, actually it's probably closer to 80, 88%. And then remaining students will go military or career. So again, the goal in our department is to try to identify and have a plan for every senior. But again, the college planning night is really designed to hit those specifically looking for college. So you all have the printout, but this is just the names of the counselors in our office. Oftentimes, you'll start to probably get to know our secretaries. We have a new secretary, Marisol Goncalves, and then we have Miss Teresa Kavanaugh. She handles all our transcripts. So you'll get to know them a little bit more as we get into later in the year, especially around scholarship time when you're going to be requesting transcripts. Whether you realize that or not, you will be eventually. So we're just going to jump in. Where should seniors be in the process right now with this college process? Where should they be? Again, we started last spring. Students worked on this over the summer, whether it be college visits, narrowing their list down. And so right now, that's where seniors should be. They should be finalizing a college list that they've developed with their counselor, with their family, however they've gone and developed it. But they really need to start to balance that list out and recognize, and we'll talk a little bit more about reach realistic and safety, but they need to seniors need to start to recognize where they are in relation to that college. Another big factor is the admissions piece. We're going to talk a little bit more about this as well, but students have options at many colleges, regular decision, which is usually, could be anywhere from December 15th through January and February. That's the standard traditional application that has a regular deadline, and students usually hear back sometime in March. Early action. Again, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but early action means students apply early, usually November 15th, some November 1st, some December 1st. So students apply early with early action. And they hear back early, meaning they hear back right around January, but they're not committed to that college, okay? The benefit to that is you hear back earlier, as opposed to waiting until March. But you have to have your ducks in a row. You have to be prepared. Your application has to be ready. Then there's early decision. Early decision is essentially a binding contract, meaning you are saying You can only apply to one school early decision. Not every college and university offers early decision either. But if you apply early decision, you will, you're telling that one school, if you're accepted, you will go and withdraw your other applications. All right? So early decision means you want to go to this school, you feel you meet the criteria, and you feel you could pay the bill. They do try to get a rough financial package to you in advance, but I would expect that, you know, I think a college's expectation is if you're applying that you're prepared, potentially. It doesn't mean you won't get financial aid. I want to make that clear. They'll try to get you whatever your package might be. College visits. So there's a variety of ways to explore a college. How many seniors here have already visited a college campus? All right, that's good. What about parents have visited a college campus? All right, that's good too. All right. So again, I mean, we encourage students to obviously, spring was a great time, summer, and even now in the fall. Many colleges have a variety of options, open houses. If you can find an open house or a tour, sometimes you can they'll give out application fee waivers because you're applying to all these colleges and universities. Depending on how many you apply to, you have to pay a college application fee. Sometimes when you go on these tours, you'll get a fee waiver. This year, we probably have, and we're back, I think, to pre-COVID, but we probably have about 50 or 60 colleges and universities that come here to Burlington High School, and they meet with seniors. How many seniors here have signed up for a visit? Okay, what college did you hear from? Providence. Okay, what about you? Who? Endicott and Bentley, good. So we have, again, probably about 50 or 60 colleges. They come in, they're here for about 45 minutes. A lot of times the person that comes here is the one that reviews the applications as well. So it's basically like a commercial for their college. But again, it's a good way for our seniors to hear in a more individualized setting from that college admissions rep. And seniors know how to sign up through our college management program called SCORE. There are some college fairs, they're coming back. And the high school here, the Burlington High School Counseling Department, we would co-sponsor a fair with the Middlesex League schools in Reading every year in the spring. We haven't done that in a couple of years, so it's probably going to be coming back. It obviously doesn't help the current seniors, but we do try to publicize college fairs in the area. All right, so as you can see, there's a variety of college fairs. Has anyone been to a college fair? Okay, so you know, being with the whole COVID thing, I think college fairs kind of went away for a little while. But a college fair is basically in a big setting, and there could be up to 150 or so colleges, and they have tables set up. The one piece of advice I would give you is don't go in, try to get the list of colleges that are there. That's usually publicized. If you go in with no list, you'll be completely overwhelmed. All right, I would suggest identify what colleges are going to be there if you tend to attend a college fair, and try to hit those colleges first, and then you can kind of bounce around and check out the other schools. But these are some college fairs in the area. One of the things that we're hearing about is demonstrated interest. So colleges, especially with technology now, they're tracking a student's interest in that college. Meaning if you visit a college, it's documented. If you set up an account with their school, or go to their Facebook page, log into their school site to set up an account. We had the opportunity to go to Holy Cross several years ago, and that was one of the big themes that we heard is demonstrated interest. And we had heard all things being equal between two students, if they can identify student A has shown a tremendous amount of interest in this school through visits, through visiting the website. They had all sorts of information, which was a little scary, but that, I think, goes to show you that those things can be important if you're truly interested in that school. I talked a little bit about this, but I'll briefly talk about it again. The reach, realistic, and safety. So as you're developing your college list, you're categorizing your colleges, all right? The way you categorize it is a number of factors. Grades are a big one, probably the biggest. Extracurricular activities, And when I say grades, I mean the transcript and your GPA. Some schools, SATs may or may not apply. That could be a factor as well. So every college is potentially a little bit different. But at the end of the day, when you're categorizing these schools, we go with a reach school, which is really, it boils down to the percent accepted at that college. So, you know, we'll use the example of, say, Harvard. You know, they probably accept 5 to 6% of the students that apply. It's a very low percentage. And this isn't the type of game where if you apply to 10 reach schools, you'll get into 1 out of the 10. That's not the way you would want to set your list. It's okay to apply to a reach school. We would never say to a student, don't apply. But we would ask you, let's look at the statistics and let's be realistic about it. What's the expectations of this school? All right? And so that's kind of how we gauge it. And our program score, the college program that we use, shows you the percent accepted. You can see that statistic. Okay? Realistic means there's a high probability of being accepted into that college. All right? Again, we're looking at the same information. We're also looking at that percent accepted. And that's the primary way to gauge the realistic. And then safety, it's a very high likelihood you'll be accepted. All right? And so we know that these options aren't necessarily easy because there's no crystal ball and you can't say whether or not you'll get in, but looking at the information, meeting with your counselor, you know, parents as well, and being involved in the research aspect of it, I think that's all important as you create your list. And then financial safety, which would be not only meeting the expectations, but the financial piece looks very realistic. In Massachusetts, we're lucky. Well, we're lucky and not so lucky. We're lucky that we have great public universities and colleges. Not so lucky that they're the highest tuition in the country. But we're very lucky in that sense because if a student goes to one of the 4 UMasses, UMass Amherst, Boston, Dartmouth, or Lowell, or any of the state universities, which you've probably heard of, Salem, Fitchburg, Framingham, Westfield, I know I'm missing a few, but so the state universities can be a financially safe option as well, potentially. And then in our program score, you can look at something called scattergrams, and it's basically like the best way to explain it. It's like a graph, and it gives you the averages of Burlington High School at acceptance rates and denial rates at particular colleges and universities. So you could look up a college and you could say, what's the average GPA and SAT score of a Burlington High School student that was accepted here? All right, so that data goes back. How many years do we have in score going back? 5 or more? Yeah, so we usually go back 3 or 4 years, but we're using a new management program and we might need to adjust that. I think it goes back like a decade. All right, so it's a lot of data, but it's good to be able to at least look at that because as you're categorizing, you could see where you fall. Again, I talked about this at the beginning, regular decision, most common method, anywhere from January 1st to March 1st. And I didn't mention the candidate reply date. So that is when you are telling that college you're going there. You send them a deposit by May 1st to one college. And that's your way of saying, I'm coming there. All right, early action. Again, you can apply to multiple schools early action. It's non-binding, but you hear back sooner. It says end of December. It's usually more like January, you know, when you hear back. There is a little bit of a trend, although that trend seems to have slowed down a little bit, maybe because of COVID, but some schools are saying you can only apply to their school early action, which is it's not early decision because you're not committed there, but they only want you to apply to one school early action. So I think BC is still one of them, and I'm not sure who else in Harvard. Early decision, again, you're making a commitment to that college or university. Some have added, I know Tufts, UMass Amherst have added like an early decision 1 and an early decision 2. So some schools may have early decision as 2 options. And then I didn't mention rolling. Rolling admissions essentially is you apply whenever, and you hear back within, I don't know, 10, 12 weeks. But if you do the math as the year goes on, you know, it's going to start to shrink the ability to potentially go to that school, depending on the school. We would say if it's rolling admission, if the first quarter grades look good, probably send at that point. And as I'm speaking, if you have questions, just raise your hand. Go ahead. That's okay. Action. So that's a very good question, is about grades. And we're going to talk about that in a little while. I don't want to steal Mrs. Leary's thunder, but I can tell you that most students applying early, we send the report, we send the transcript. It has senior year classes, not grades because they haven't closed. But as soon as the grades close, we send them. And so depending on that deadline, like grades close for us on October 28th. If you have a November 1st deadline, we're gonna send it out a week before that anyway. But once first quarter grades close, and hopefully the grades look good, we would go ahead and send those grades. Some colleges will ask for those grades too. Yes. Depends. Sometimes they'll say that you've been moved into the regular application pool, and sometimes you're just denied.
That's called deferred. You get deferred. So if you get deferred through early action, you're pushed to the regular decision pool, but there can be three decisions: outright denial, deferred, or accepted.
And then we have waitlisted too. I think that's coming up. Yeah. So we work with an agency called National Student Clearinghouse. National Student Clearinghouse collects data all across the country of college acceptance, because on our end, really, if you think about it, our seniors go off to college, we send a transcript, but we don't know that they've gone there for 4 years. We only know where we sent the transcript. So as a school, we really have no avenue to figure out, did this student end up staying at that college? Did they go to that college? So National Student Clearinghouse is the agency that collects this data. And so we ask them, or they provide us with information like this, meaning these are where our students applied, and so this kind of categorizes the school. Actually, I think National Student Clearinghouse is the next one, but this is data that we've collected over the years as to how competitive some of these schools are, and this is also based on that statistic I mentioned, admission rate. So when we talk about categorizing schools, we can see reach schools, so it's not just Ivy League schools. There's schools that are considered small Ivies, you know, or more of the elite schools. So these tend to be very, very competitive schools. And then on the right, again, very competitive schools. And you see UMass Amherst up there as well. It's a very competitive school. They have students from all around the country that apply. All right, so again, we're just making you aware. We're not saying don't apply to any of these schools. We just want you to be aware of the fact that it's very competitive. So on that note, the state school system, I wanted to talk about that. I referenced it earlier, the UMass system and the state university. So because you live in this state, you pay taxes in this state. You are able to attend a state school, and you pay, the tuition is much lower for a Massachusetts student. So if an out-of-state student wants to apply to UMass, they're paying probably double of what a Massachusetts resident would pay. So the state schools, so because they're state schools, state-funded, they have to be very public about how they go about accepting students. So there's a website, Mass Higher Ed, that spells everything out. But of course, you know, we in our department are very in tune with that as well. So they are publicizing different things throughout the course of the year. They tell us how they calculate GPAs, what they include in the GPA, so on and so forth. So with the state schools, one of the things we've noticed this year too, in the past couple of years, test optional. We are finding though that certain majors, they still want a test. So like nursing, for example, I think they're still going to want to maybe see that SAT test, and which it says it right there. And then less than a 2.0. So if a student has below a 2.0, they most of the time will not accept the student initially. They might ask the student, I know Salem State has a summer program where a student can go in the summer and then transfer in full time. So if you're less than a 2.0, they'll probably recommend that you start at a community college first. And on that note, community college, as you know, we actually had Middlesex here today. So there's several community colleges in Massachusetts, and they have an agreement called the Mass Transfer. So what that means is you'll start out at a community college, get an associate's degree, and then you can automatically transfer those credits to a 4-year school. They have something called an Articulation Agreement. So the community colleges have an articulation agreement with the state schools in Massachusetts in that after 2 years, if you maintain a good GPA, I think it's 3.0 or better, after 2 years, you can automatically, it's essentially like a transfer to a 4-year school. You don't need SAT scores. In their mind, you've proven yourself. I think they see research and statistics that say you already have 2 years under your belt, you have a very high likelihood now to graduate from our college, which they probably like that, those types of situations, because they know you'll graduate and move on. So, and they do 3.0 or higher. You can get, it looks like you can get a rebate, and just keep your eyes. Some of the state schools have extra requirements, and I think they also have an agreement with Suffolk and maybe Merrimack, Middlesex, meaning the state school, the community college has that articulation agreement with a couple of private schools too. Okay, so it's just something to be aware of. It's an option to consider, you know, in terms of it could be a financial thing, depending on what you want to major in. 2 years at a community college may make more sense financially, or it may not. Again, it all depends on you know, the research that you've done and what you plan on pursuing. All right, I've spoken enough. Now I'm going to hand it over to Mrs. Leary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Leary. I might come over this side. By the way, thank you all for coming. We recognize that this material is very dry. I say all the time to students, I wish there was a more fun way to present this. But this next section it covers what we held off on talking about in junior meetings until September, when the students are seniors. We didn't want to burden them with this information. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts about actually applying and who's responsible for what. So the students' responsibilities, they do need to be the ones driving the bus and carving out time each week to do the research, to you know, plug away at their applications. It is sort of like an ongoing, a long-term research project. It really is, and there's no other way around it, unfortunately. It adds to, I know, the stress of senior year. But it is up to them to be doing their research, carving out time each week. They do have to know their application requirements and deadlines. So once they have their finalized list of colleges, it is up to them, and the best way to do this is to visit individual college websites to confirm, is to visit the individual college website of each college they're applying to and look at the requirements. And we often, you know, emphasize the use of a template or a spreadsheet, whatever works, to help them stay organized with a list of their schools, deadlines, how many letters of recommendation are required, and things like that to help them stay organized. It is also up to them to know counseling requirements and deadlines. So there really is no way around it. They do have to meet with us this fall if they're applying to college. And I know occasionally we have students who are working with someone outside, and that's a family decision. The students still need to schedule regular meetings with us so that they're following our deadlines and our guidelines as well. We ask that students make and keep regular appointments. And so a general rule of thumb is just making sure, for example, that you give at least a month's notice about deadlines and recommendations. And just know, for the students to recognize that the fall is busy for counselors, and to make sure that they're allowing plenty of notice to book those appointments. It is, as Mr. Adebato said, that's the main reason why seniors have a study hall this half of the year, and the main reason why juniors have the study hall in spring. The schedule is designed that way so that they can meet with us. It is really important to check email, and we recognize that email is sort of outdated in terms of communication for this generation. But not only are seniors getting the most information pushed out to them from their high school about all the different senior events that are going on, but the colleges that are sending information to their private emails as well. It's really important to be checking those emails, opening them. As Mr. Adebato said, colleges track that. They can see whether or not an email has even been opened, believe it or not. And to once the student applies, to make sure that they are checking their portal to see that everything has been received. Because we are not typically the ones that get notified if pieces of the application are missing. That is, the colleges reach out to the student, and so they need to communicate with us if something is missing. It is also the student's responsibility to use SCORE. So if you have older children who have been through BHS before, you're probably familiar with Naviance. We switched over to SCORE. We've made the shift. And we've been asking all of our students to please be patient with us because it is a learning year for us as well. There's no way around using SCORE. So I think the next slide is why they need to use it. And many of the same reasons why they need, and former students needed to use Naviance. So it is how we send transcripts and letters of recommendation, as well as some required school forms. And it is, it's still, they use the same terminology, scattergrams, for those graphs that Mr. Adebato mentioned, which, you know, we have years of data so that students can see how they stack up against BHS alumni, and it can help them determine a realistic safety score for them. SCORE, and by the way, it is not pronounced how it looks. It is SCORE, like score a goal. It is how they would sign up for those college visits that Mr. Adebato mentioned, the reps that are coming here throughout the fall. It is how they can track their application deadlines. And it is also where we will be posting local and community scholarship applications. So in terms of who sends what, this is always the big question once senior year begins. BHS is responsible, as I said, for sending the transcript, something that's called a school profile, which I will touch upon in a few minutes, letters of recommendation, and occasionally supplemental materials that cannot be sent electronically. This has gotten more rare. One example I've used is, and it's been a few years since this happened, but I had a student who had a college that required a graded paper, and so we sent a hard copy on his behalf. What the student is responsible for sending is the online application. So whether it's a common app or a private application, they have until that deadline to hit submit on that application. We do not recommend waiting until that deadline, but that is their responsibility, completing the app, clicking submit, and any supplements that might go along with that as well. And then when they do submit the application, they will be prompted to pay an application fee or enter in if they have a fee waiver, enter that information in. And the essay is also the student's responsibility. That is built into the common application. So it's often the last piece that students are working on. I'll be honest, they've completed their whole application, they're working on their essay in a separate doc, and they're copying and pasting it into that writing section of the application. So they're responsible for that as well. Students are also responsible for sending their SAT or ACT scores. And this, as you know, Ms. Minty, I believe, is going to get into this a little bit more detail, the ins and outs of the test optional policies. If a student is choosing to send their scores, it is their responsibility to send it directly from the testing agency to the colleges. And do you go into more detail on that, Ms. Minty? You do? Okay, so I won't go into too much right now. It is the student's responsibility to complete financial aid forms, and this is where parents can really help out, and they will often need your full support filling out those forms. And occasionally there are supplemental materials that may be sent electronically. For example, if a student is an art major, they will need to complete a portfolio, and nowadays that's all done electronically. So that is one example. These are a few reminders when students are preparing to apply. There are tasks that they must do, and just please know that we can assist them with it. We walk them through this, and when they meet with us to turn in their transcript request slips and to ensure that everything is being sent, we can help them with this. So they don't have to necessarily have this all done on their own. We help them double check it. They will have to complete what's called the FERPA waiver on the common application as well as on SCORE, and this is a task that most, if not all, of the counselors have already walked their seniors through on SCORE. They will have to request a transcript through their counselor at least 10 school days before the deadline. And there is a process for that using some colored slips. I'll go over that in a few minutes as well. It is the student's responsibility. They must send their application via Common App or the college's website. So any schools that are not on the Common Application, MIT is one that I think of off the top of my head, Endicott, they are not on the Common Application. So students have to go to that college's website and complete the application electronically through that website. So some students will get away with only having to do the Common App, and some students might have to do multiple applications. They also must pay the application fee or indicate fee waiver if they're eligible for that. It's optional to print a copy of your application and a payment receipt. Last year we processed over 1,700 transcripts. And that brings us to the transcript. So we are going to break down the different factors of the admissions process. And so the most important piece is the transcript. It is the student's permanent academic record. It consists of final grades 9 through 12. Well, I'll get into it in a bit. It includes GPA. We can go right to the slide and I'll just show it. So this is what it looks like. We recognize this is not a great copy, so we will break it down. But just to give you sort of an overview, in the top right is where the cumulative GPA is, and it will be the GPA as of the end of junior year. And there are 4 boxes. Top left is 9, bottom left is 10, top right is 11, and then 12. And then the bottom is just a key. And I believe the next slide is a magnified. Yes, so this is the top portion of it. And the most important one is the middle. So we'll jump to this so you can get a good idea about what the transcript looks like that we're sending to colleges. So 9th, 10th, and 11th grade all look very similar. It has a list of the courses, the level of those courses, the final grade only, and then the credits that were awarded for each class. 12th grade is going to look different, and it looks different also depending on the time of year that the student applies to the college. So, for example, if we were to send a transcript today, it would only have grade 12 classes, level, no grades at all. Okay, so it would be blank. It would basically just be the courses with the levels. And then when we hit first quarter, as Mr. Adebato said, it ends October 28th, and it does take some time for these to be updated. But usually around the middle of November is when first quarter grades are finalized and they are added to the transcript. So any students applying for November 1st, typically get no grades sent initially, but then when first quarter grades are added, we send a second transcript to update those schools with first quarter grades. November 15th or later, we'll have those first quarter grades on there. Okay, so this is the only year where quarterly grades are looked upon closely, and then those grades stay on there, by the way, until usually the first week of February, and then they are replaced with mid-year grades. And so if a student applies anywhere between November 15th and February 1st, they're going to see first quarter grades, and then we send them an update of the mid-year grades. And senior year is the only year where we do recalculate the GPA halfway through the year. So a mid-year report that gets sent out to any colleges where students have not gotten a decision from at that point for second week of February, they will see mid-year averages as well as an updated GPA. And then this is just the bottom that explains the key to all of the codes. So we do have 2 transcript request forms that we often reference. The one you will hear about the most is the colored slips. So each counselor has a different color. Mine happen to be pink. Students get tired of hearing about pink slips or purple slips or yellow slips. But this is what ensures that we send the transcript and letters of recommendation to colleges. And so we ask that students meet at least 10 school days before the deadline to complete the colored slip for their counselor. And it's not like a drop off or, just hand it over to the secretary. We have a meeting, we review everything. This is what you're responsible for doing by the deadline. This is what we will now start processing for you in the next 10 school days. And so students don't have to have everything done by then on their end. But they do have to have that meeting with us 10 school days prior to the deadline to ensure that we can have enough time to process the transcript and letters and what we're responsible for sending. So they still have until their deadline to click submit on those applications. And so colleges are receiving different pieces of the application from different places at different times, and that's okay. They will add it to the student's file, update the student's portal, and that's their way of letting the student know what has been received when it was received. So those colored slips are strictly for college application purposes. If a student, and this does come up throughout senior year especially, if a student needs an unofficial transcript at all for any reason, whether they're going on an interview or sharing it with a coach or need it to fill out a scholarship application, there is a generic white form on the counter in the counseling department that they can fill out, come down and fill out, and just put back in the box, and our registrar will have it within 24 to 48 hours. So that we do try to just let them know there is a difference between those transcript requests. And so I did mention the school profile. So this is often, you will see this on college checklists that send a transcript, send the school profile. We automatically send the school profile along with the transcript. And what the profile is it's typically a 1 or 2 page document that high schools throughout the country create to basically describe how their school functions and what makes them different from other schools, so that college admissions reps can compare them equally. So it explains, for example, how we calculate GPA, how many AP courses we offer, test information, mean SAT scores, things like that. Just what might make our high school different from other high schools across the country. And that's it for me. So, Miss Mitty.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I just am going to be sitting, if that's all right. I had a surgery and I just can't stand a lot yet, but I hope you can see me and hear me. And I'm going to look at my little screen so I don't turn all the way around. But I guess I'm now just further breaking down some other pieces of the application that Mrs. Leary and Mr. Adebato already talked about. So one big piece for a lot of colleges are the recommendation letters. And like Mrs. Leary said, it is important to look on each college website to see specifically what types of letters they require. But they almost always require a counselor recommendation as the primary letter. And then often they require at least one teacher and sometimes two teachers. So during junior year, we do recommend to all our students to request letters from two teachers. And when I say teachers, I also am referring usually to what is called core teachers, so not elective teachers. Many colleges prefer these letters to be from the 5 core subjects, so English, math, science, history, or world language. But again, read their websites or reach out to their admission departments. For example, if you're applying for business and you are thinking about including a business teacher. It is, again, was said, but really important to just give us all really good notice about what your first deadline is with a minimum of a month's notice so that we have time, because we're not just writing that one letter, but for us, we're writing about 50 of them, so we need to spread them out and make sure we spend good time. There is a process on SCORE where students can put in the teacher requests. That's really just like an electronic reminder for the teacher after they've asked in person. But SCORE is the system that we send the letters through to. So it's a bit confusing. If you may have been looking on Common App, there's also a recommendation section on Common App. But we do not send our letters through there. So on Common App, all the students have to do is just list the names of the people whose letters they're going to send, but they should not actually request the letters there or put the emails in there, because again, we'll send them through SCORE instead. And if occasionally people might also have additional letters, these would always be optional, but if they have an additional letter from someone outside the high school, they could actually request that person's letter through Common App. Or more often, they just provide their counselor with a copy of that letter, and we'll send it out for them. It's very nice to send thank you notes. I think that's why we have that up there. I always love to hear, people do it at different times in the year, but it's very nice. Maybe often when students get into college, they might do their thank you notes at that point to people who help them with their process. So I think each counselor has possibly slightly different forms that we require for our letters. Speaking for myself, there's a counselor questionnaire they fill out, and there's also a copy of their activity list, or what I'm looking for. And I think that's similar to most of the counselors. Teachers, they will each have their own thing. So some teachers might not have any specific form, and others might have their own form that you fill out also. We do have a parent questionnaire that's available, and again, it varies by counselor, so I believe Mrs. Leary requires that, right? I do not require it, but I welcome it if anyone does want to share it. Did I miss anything here about letters? I don't think so. Oh, and just, again, very important to just check those college requirements. Okay, so activity list, I mentioned that's one of the things I like to have that helps me write a nice letter for my students, but it's also part of most applications, including the common application, that colleges want to know what activities have students been involved in outside of their classes. It doesn't have to be just high school activities. So jobs outside of school, being involved with scouting programs or other things, those are all equally valid activities, so please don't feel bad if you just haven't been part of 10 clubs at the high school. But all those activities, whether in or outside the high school, would be included. We have a format on, is it on SCORE still? Maybe not yet. Used to be on Naviance. Again, we're in transition a little bit. But we shared this last year. It was one of the junior assignments in the counseling meetings for students to create these. So hopefully they did. It's not too late to do it if they haven't yet. Another reason they're going to need it besides their college applications is for their scholarship applications. Later this year, most of those will require an activity list also. And activity lists are more about quality than quantity. So I mentioned, again, don't feel bad if you haven't been part of 10 clubs. It's really just as, if not more impressive, to have just a few things you've been involved in, but you've been deeply involved, as opposed to just trying to have more things listed than anybody else. If you did give a counselor a copy last year and new things have been added over the summer, or you're just updating what you're still involved in this year, please make sure you keep us up to date on that too. Okay, and they're not in SCORE, but in our Google Classroom, we definitely have, each of us has Google Classroom pages for our seniors, and within there we do have these samples and do's and don'ts as well. Okay, so the essay, I think, I forget which of the first presenters mentioned that too, but that is, for a lot of students, it's the part they put off, and it is the hardest part of the application. For others, it might be fun and exciting, because it's also the most creative part of your application, where it really is open-ended. You can write on any topic you want. There are some more specific prompts if saying write about anything you want feels too open-ended. But within the Common App, there is a section where those prompts are listed under the writing section. And the essay, it's just around a page people are writing. There really is no topic that is off limits to write about. Sometimes people will say, oh, don't write about sports because everyone writes about sports, or don't write about something depressing. I assure you that is not true. Admission officers tell us all the time they have read the best essays and the worst essays on every topic, and they just want people to write about whatever it is that is most meaningful to them, and that's going to just share a piece of who they are. So you can't capture your entire identity on one piece of paper, but you're just choosing to write about something that's going to give them a little snapshot of maybe something they wouldn't know just through looking at your classes and your recommendation letters. And the other thing they're just looking for is to make sure that you're a decent writer. So they're trying to see that you're a decent writer and just get a little more information about you. I would highly recommend it says proofread 3 times there, because you are making an impression as far as the writing. So good idea not only to spell check, but also just have another set of eyes on it. Sure.
I'll be very quick. I had a student that wrote their essay, I think it was in Microsoft Word, might have been Google, and they copied and pasted it into the Common App and then never checked it and submitted it. Common App has a word count limit, and she probably had, say, 700 words, and it was like 650. So the last 50 words were not copied in. So after you copy your essay into the Common App, always double check it, because then we had to fax that essay to all those colleges. So just a word of caution on that.
And yet, I imagine this student still got into college, so that does sound like a bit of a nightmare. But yes, it is. They do have a specific word count on there. I think it's minimum 250 to maximum 650 words, and that's a good point, not only to check it first, but check your whole application again on Common App before you send it out, that it looks the way you want it to. And a new thing this year that's nice is during Flex Blocks this fall, I believe there are sessions that students can sign up for to get help with people reviewing their essays. So I think a lot of my seniors have already taken advantage of that. I said review the essays, but it's also a place they can go just to brainstorm and work on their essays. So that's a good thing to think about if you're having trouble getting started too. Okay, the test optional thing. It's in a way it simplifies things, but in a way it's complicated. So honestly, almost every college continues to be test optional this year. I personally looked up most every college I could think of last year, and I believe I found less than 10 across the country that actually were requiring test scores. So for most students, they do not need to send their SAT or ACT scores this year, unless, of course, you're at one of those 10 schools that would require it. And again, none of our state schools do. But if the school is test optional, that's the part where it gets complicated. Should you send your scores or should you not? Generally, you really should not if your scores are not, certainly if they're not average for that school. So you're not just considering are your test scores above average in general, but you want to look at the data for that school. What are the average test scores? If your scores are higher than their average, that might be a time to send them, because in those cases, some schools may actually offer scholarships for students whose scores are above average. If your scores are below average, it could hurt your application, even though they're test optional. So you really shouldn't send them if they're below average for that school. If they're average, it's kind of a toss-up, but I would generally wouldn't, because they're not going to hurt or help you. And it does cost money for each school that you send your test scores to. So I would not recommend sending the scores until you see what they are. That's different than how it used to be when they were required. Sometimes, you know, you're going to have to send them anyway, and people would just send them. Now that they're test optional, we really wouldn't recommend sending them until you see them. And again, in most cases for my students this year, they really aren't going to be sending scores. But if you're in a situation where either they're required or your scores are above average for a school and you want to share it with them. I think, does the next slide break down? Oh, okay, just one more interlude, I guess, before saying how to send them. If you are thinking about still retaking or taking an SAT or ACT, you should try to do that by this winter. Again, because the regular deadlines will be in January or February, so you would need to have your test done by January. And the dates are on either the SAT or ACT website. Now, as far as how to send them, like Mrs. Leary said, it's not us that send the scores, but it is the student who requests the score report directly from that test website. So for the SATs, the website is collegeboard.com. They just go to the same section where they signed up for the test, but there's an option to click that says send scores. And then they just select the places that they want to send the scores, and they pay $12 per place that they're sending the scores to. This, very important to know though, this is different than almost anything else that you request online now. We're used to getting things overnight delivery or maybe getting them in a few days. The test scores still often take about a month for the college to receive after you request them. So if you are here tonight and you have a November 1st deadline and you want that school to receive your SAT scores, you really do need to request to send them, you know, tonight, this weekend, not much later than that. And same thing with the ACT, but just a different website. Let me just make sure, not missing. As far as score choice, I feel like that's too much detail for tonight too, again, because most people aren't sending them. But you do have the option on the SAT website, if you took the test multiple times, to either choose sending all your scores, in which case the colleges will combine the highest score for you, or to choose just one date or the other. So you don't have to send all your scores, it depends. Communicating with admissions. So I think this came up today, and I can't remember the specific example, but honestly, the admissions departments love to hear from students. They're never going to be annoyed when a student reaches out to them with a question. That's what they're there for, and when a student reaches out to them with a question, it impresses them that that student is independent and they're curious about the school. It demonstrates interest as well. Overall, you want to avoid having a parent call the admission department for the student. You want it to be the student making the contact. And I do think, like it says, don't be afraid to pick up the phone. For most questions, you're going to get a much quicker and more thorough answer if you actually ask it on the phone as opposed to an email. Now, I understand some, you know, depending on your work schedule or things, if you have to send an email, that's not terrible either. But yeah, call them. They're friendly people, and they're sitting around waiting for your call right now, honestly. And in terms of emails, like Mrs. Leary said, maybe they're something not students are not as familiar with writing, but it is important to if they are going to send an email, make it sure it's addressed similar to how a letter would be. So it would say, dear admissions, and sincerely, or signed using that appropriate kind of letter format, as opposed to just, hey, I have a question. Okay. And if you're planning to do an interview, which I would highly recommend, it's almost never required anymore, but if colleges offer the opportunity for an interview, it can only help your application. And we're happy to meet with students and help them prepare, kind of practice for an interview if they're interested. No, I think I'm actually these next couple slides and then you, yes. So just a couple other miscellaneous topics here before Ms. Stratabato is going to get into more financial aid stuff. If for students who are planning or interested in playing a varsity sport in college at the Division I or II level, there is a very specific process that they have to go through in order to be eligible through the NCAA. This does not apply to Division III or to club or intramural level sports, but just again for Division I or II. They do have to send a copy of their transcript to the NCAA. The NCAA is making sure they have minimum grades that they need in certain core classes throughout high school. They have a list of the courses that they will and won't accept from our school. We can assist them with the process, as can their coaches, if this is something they're interested in. I know we ask our juniors when we meet too, usually if they're even thinking about it, we provide them with this information. But they do need to send their grades, and then the test scores I think are still optional, but if sending, they use a code to send them there too. All right. For students with any kind of disability, whether physical or mental health, colleges, just like high schools, are required to provide reasonable accommodations for those students. And it's up to the student to choose whether or not they're going to share that with their college, but I would highly recommend that they do. So every time you have a new class, the teacher, when they go over their syllabus, they will mention this, and they'll invite students to please let them know if they do have any disabilities and what accommodations they may need. And I think it's always better, even if you may not need it, just to let them know up front in case anything comes up and you might. But each college also will have offices to help assist with this, and especially if you've needed accommodations or assistance in high school, I would especially recommend that as part of your process of deciding where to go, that you're also reaching out to the college admissions to ask about what types of accommodations they do and don't provide, and their process of what documentation they're looking for. Usually, if a student has a 504 plan or an IEP in high school, sharing that with the college will give them context, but it's not required. Students don't need to have those plans in high school in order to receive accommodations in college. The main thing is they're just looking for actual documentation of the disability. And yeah, I think that's mostly the highlights there. And then last but not least, gap years. You may or may not have heard of this concept. Is a gap year is not just kind of procrastinating on college. It's really making an intentional choice to take a year before you go to college, or sometimes more than that, but usually it's just a year, to get a little more experience in the world, so that when you go to college, you kind of know what you're really passionate about, and you have more experience. Sometimes people are just worn out after high school and need a little break before continuing to commit to several more years of classes too. So there are so many places that run organized programs. If you're interested, there are some that actually are full-year programs, but there are also quite a few you can do just for a semester or for a month. I've had a few students who've done, maybe a combination of two or three different programs over the course of a year. Some are things where are traditional kind of study abroad type programs where you go to another country and you're immersed in the language and the culture, but you're also working on classes at the same time. Others are focused on service projects. Others are more traditionally like work internship programs. And we do have on our website a list of a bunch of different websites if you're interested about it. But doing the gap year, if you're planning to go to college, the intention is you're going to go to college, we would still recommend that you apply to college now while you have the assistance from us to apply. And then you would just get into the college and request to take a year off before you start at that college. Otherwise, it's just more difficult to apply after you're already out of high school. All right, and I'm going to pass it back to Mr. Adebato. I know that was a lot.
All right, we're in the final stretch. Everyone's still awake. That's a good thing. So financial aid, this is obviously not a financial aid night, but we do want to provide you with a little bit of information. We do have this website in your packet, but mifa.org. They have events, some live, but they're virtual. They also have pre-recorded videos. They're actually very helpful. They're not long videos, but they can give you some information. They have them categorized by different type of documents that you need to become familiar with, like the Fafsa Form, which I'll talk about on the next slide. They may have a session on that through the online series. So they have a number of different types of opportunities for you to become familiar with that process. And then on October 20th, right here in the auditorium, we'll have Financial Aid Officer Amy Staffier. She's the Financial Aid Director at Simmons College. Pre-COVID, she would come here to the high school to do presentations, and now have been virtual the past couple of years, but she'll be here live. And so you can ask any questions that you want from her, but she does like kind of an overview presentation for parents, so I'd encourage you to attend that. So 2 big forms to be aware of. One is called the Fafsa Form. How many parents have heard of the Fafsa? All right, so that's good. And how many seniors have heard of the Fafsa? Okay, so in any event, that's a big form that needs to be completed. Big in the sense that it's very popular, but to fill it out, really, it's if you check out one of the webinars, it's really not a terrible form to complete. And it won't take you 6 hours to do it, but you do need to have certain information with you when you fill it out. And so they've made it easier over the years. I think what's going to happen is with the FAFSA, it will pre-populate a lot of information because it connects to your tax records. So about 5 years ago, the FAFSA used to be available on January 1st of every year. It's now changed. It's October 1st. So if you're filling out a FAFSA now, that's not the correct FAFSA. On October 1st, you can start to work on the FAFSA for next fall. All right, and the FAFSA is about state and federal funding to help you with the college process. They'll ask a whole bunch of information about income and things like that, and then the money that comes from the FAFSA would be through state and federal monies, okay? And the money that you get, obviously grants and scholarships are what you'd want to qualify for, but they also have loans and things like that that you could qualify for through the FAFSA. Work study is a qualification through the FAFSA as well. That's when a student is given a job on campus, and the idea there is that helps defer the college payment by working on a college campus. The other popular form is called the Css Profile. This is through private schools. This would be to qualify for institutional funds, not state or federal funds. So the Css Profile, I can tell you it is worse than the FAFSA in terms of the information you need and the length of it. They ask a lot more personalized questions. And I think I know that you have to pay for every college you apply to with the profile. All right, so you should check out the profile as well. It's not, I don't believe there's any state schools that would require it. It's more for the private schools. But again, that would be through institutional funds. Some colleges may also require additional applications, so you'd want to be aware of that, and you'd figure that out through the application process at a given school. And colleges will want you to finish that up, wrap up the FAFSA form or the Css Profile by a certain deadline if you'd like to try to qualify for any kind of financial aid. Ms. Minty mentioned the scholarship program. So when we talk about the scholarship program in Burlington, we have a number of different organizations in town here contribute to the scholarship program. So it's not one person or one group deciding on scholarships. It's several. And so there is Adopt a Class. Many of you have heard of Adopt a Class. That's just one scholarship option with the scholarship program. Adopt a Class is parents have been volunteering kindergarten through 8th grade. High school, now the students are doing the volunteer work. And so what happens is in February, there'll be an application. You'll fill out everything you've been involved in through Adopt a Class, and then they do a calculation, and then you get scholarship money. All right, it all depends. I can't tell you the exact amount, but what they do is they'll look at whoever has the most hours, And then they do a calculation, that student would get the highest scholarship, highest dollar amount, and then they kind of go from that top person. It's a committee that meets and they go through it pretty extensively. That's just one scholarship program. We also have Scholarship America that we work with. That's connected to a lot of the local donors. A lot of businesses in town offer scholarships through that. Then we have fraternal organizations. We have memorial scholarships. So all this information in terms of local scholarships really starts to be publicized mid to late February. All right? And in SCORE, we have something, students have access to something called a OneDrive, which is kind of like a Google Drive, but it's within SCORE. And I don't know if any seniors have noticed that yet. But we have a document in there that we already have, we've started to list scholarships already. Not many local I don't think we have any local scholarships available yet. But we have some national and state scholarships in there, like the Coca-Cola scholarships in there, and a few others. So that's through the OneDrive on SCORE. And parents, you can get access to SCORE in the last slide. You can send an email to Teresa Kavanaugh in our office to get access to that. But we will be publicizing the scholarship information throughout the course of the year. Last year was about 180 seniors, and it was closer to $400,000 that was distributed. All right, and again, it's not one committee or one person. It also includes like all the youth support programs in town that they give lots of scholarships to, Chamber of Commerce. So there's a number of groups. So that total dollar value is all those different scholarships added up. MCAS. So did this class take MCAS? Let me think. Current seniors. Yeah, you would have taken it sophomore year. I have to think about that. With COVID, we had a... So now MCAS offers, or they've always offered it, now they're back to offering it again. It's not really a scholarship, it's a tuition waiver, all right? And so there's two potential options for a tuition waiver. The John and Abigail Adams, it says scholarship, but again, I'll explain what I mean by waiver in a minute. But if you're on the top 25% of MCAS scores within your high school, then you would qualify for the John and Abigail Adams. Top 25% of the MCAS scores. Now, when do you find that out? We have not heard yet from the state. We'll probably hear within the next couple weeks. All right, we would mail a letter home, all right? And then what happens there is if you go to any Massachusetts public college or university, doesn't apply to private schools, you get a tuition waiver. So we usually use UMass Amherst as the example, and I know I'm probably not exact on the amount, but UMass Amherst charges tuition, and then they charge room, board, and fees. So room, board, and fees is, we'll say, $28,000 a year to $30,000 a year. The tuition is like probably $1,800 per year. So you get the waiver on the tuition, which is not, I know it's $1,800, but still you multiply that by 4, that's a decent savings. All right, so the John and Abigail Adams is a tuition waiver if you're in the top 25% of MCAS scores in the school. The COPLIC is a little bit different. It's a little bit more complicated. This is, if you're not in that top 25%, you could still potentially qualify for a COPLIC. If you got proficient, there's 3 MCAS that they're going to, actually 2, just math and English. And if you score proficient on one and advanced on another, you could qualify for a COPLIC. COPLIC requires you to take additional steps, either through a dual enrollment class, an AP exam, or an academic award. So how do you know if you have the COPLIC? We haven't found that yet out either from the state. We're waiting. So I know it's complicated, but if you qualify for an Adams, there's nothing you really need to do in terms of an application. You just get a letter. Obviously, that would be the ideal one to get if you go into a state school. COPLIC requires you to take extra steps. We don't know who's getting what for another couple of weeks. All right, and all this information is publicized on the Massachusetts Department of Elementary Education's website as well. Make sure you're going to fafsa.gov, not .org. I had a student one year that went through the whole FAFSA process, got to the end, and they asked for $100 and she paid it, you don't pay for the FAFSA. So what she did is she went to a third party, I think it was FAFSA, not .gov, it may have been .org or another dot, but she, this third party took the information and put it into the FAFSA for her, but it cost her money. So I would just be aware, make sure you should not be paying anything for the FAFSA form. It's free. And believe it or not, with the FAFSA, 18-year-old males still need to register as part of the selective service registration process. Still a requirement on the FAFSA. So really quick, I'm just going to go through after you apply what happens. We talked about quarter one grades. You can track the status of your application either through SCORE or that particular college. Applications are going to start probably right after the first of the year. Again, always talk to your counselor with any questions if you're deferred or waitlisted. That universal deadline of May 1st, keep that in mind. That's when you actually have to decide. Ethically, you're not supposed to send out that final deposit to more than one school. So you can't like hold your spot at 3 different schools. And we can't send a final transcript to more than one college either. So wherever you're going as your college, that's where we would send that final transcript. And for seniors out of here, I mean the last 2, but basically say don't, senior year, after you've been accepted, it's still not over. You still got to finish strong, all right? We don't want to get into the horror stories that we've seen over the years of students' grades plummeting, colleges putting them on a wait list because of that. It usually does not happen, but we just always want to make sure we caution seniors and parents that at the end of senior year, it is tempting, but we ask you to, finish strong. And then this is just some information for parents. Have those discussions. I find one of the most successful ways that I've heard parents with this process is to dedicate one time per week to discuss it. Because seniors are hearing it from all angles, from relatives, friends, teachers, parents, about college. They hear it all over the place. So I think that can be a challenge sometimes. So if you dedicate one time per week, I've seen that as a very successful way to do things. As Ms. Minty said, seniors, you should be the one making contact with these colleges. It won't look good if you have your parents calling for you. All right, so please keep that in mind. Parents, the financial aid process, which I just discussed, the seniors 100% need some help with that. So obviously the whole process, you want to be there to help guide them and support them, but really the financial aid piece and the scholarship piece down the road is where you're going to realize that's where you're going to be able to help, because seniors get through the hurdle of the college application. They think that's it, free and clear, but the scholarship application process is another program that will require a lot of time, energy, and effort. And then we just, again, ways to be organized, meet with your counselor. It's very important. That's one of the biggest ways to relieve the stress on yourself, is being prepared for all this. And that's why we try to start in junior year. Seniors that are here or watching on BCAT, just keep your parents updated. All right, let them know what's going on. And we always say, if feeling overwhelmed, stressed, stress is normal, but if you're at a point where you're really concerned, you can certainly see your counselor and let us know. So we're going to wrap things up, but we talked a lot about SCORE tonight. Parents, if you want access, you can certainly have access to it. You would just email Mrs. Kavanaugh in our counseling office. She would set you up. You'd get an auto email. I'm not sure SCORE may also allow students, seniors, to put your parents in. I'm not sure. But I would, just to be safe, email Mrs. Kavanaugh. And then the senior parent questionnaire that some of our counselors ask parents to complete, that helps us to write a letter of recommendation or give us a few more thoughts as we write our letters. And we would send that to students through Google Classroom, and we would ask you to share that with parents to help us complete that. So that concludes the event. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has. I'm going to stick around for a little bit if you wanted to ask any questions after, but does anyone have any general questions they wanted to ask? This is called wait time. Yeah. Well, everyone stayed awake. That's a good thing. Again, we recognize for some parents, this is a new process. We're here to help and support. Please let us know if you have any questions at all. Besides that, thank you all for coming. Like I said, I'm going to stick around for a little while if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask. But besides that, enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.